6 American towns just lost more people in 1 year than some entire counties have living in them. We're not talking about a slow decline. We're talking about places where the population is collapsing so fast that census workers probably need to update their spreadsheets mid-count. These aren't ghost towns from the Old West. These are modern American cities that are watching their residents vanish in real time. And the reasons why reveal some uncomfortable truths about what's happening to small-town America. One of these places has lost so many people that it now has fewer residents than a typical high school. Another can't even keep its grocery stores open. The thing is, these aren't random economic blips or isolated incidents. They're symptoms of something much larger, a fundamental reshaping of where Americans can afford to live and where they feel safe enough to build a future. If you want to understand where America is headed when the economy, crime, and opportunity all move in the wrong direction at once, hit subscribe and let's walk through 6 places where everyone is heading for the exits. First up is Yazoo City, Mississippi, which just earned the dubious honor of being the fastest shrinking county area in the entire United States. It lost 6.4% of its population in a single year. Think about that. 1 out of every 15 people just said, "I'm done," and left. Not over a decade. In 12 months, you drive through Yazoo City and you'll see what used to be a thriving agricultural hub in the Mississippi Delta. Beautiful old buildings with ornate facades, wide streets that were designed for a bustling downtown full of shoppers and merchants. The kind of Main Street America that makes politicians nostalgic when they're campaigning. But here's what nobody tells you. The Delta Blues haven't just turned into a metaphor. They've turned into a modern economic tragedy playing out in real time. The automation of farming killed the jobs that built this town, and there's absolutely nothing to replace them. Nearly 50% of the adults who remain can't afford basic needs. Not luxuries, not vacations or new cars. Basic needs: food, utilities, housing. When half the town is struggling to keep food on the table and the lights on, the young people look around and realize there's no future here. There's no tech startup coming to save Yazoo City. There's no Amazon warehouse opening up. There's just the slow recognition that staying means accepting a life of struggle. So they leave for Memphis, for Jackson, for anywhere that offers even a glimmer of economic opportunity. And the people who can't afford to leave stay behind and watch the town hollow out around them like a tree rotting from the inside. The median household income here is barely above $28,000. The poverty rate hovers near 40%. This isn't a town in decline, it's a town in freefall, and every year that passes, there are fewer people left to catch it. Next on the list is Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a place that has somehow managed to lose over 30% of its downtown population in just the last decade. That's not a typo, 30%. Pine Bluff was once a thriving rail and manufacturing center, the kind of place where you could graduate high school, get a good factory job, buy a house, raise a family, and retire with a pension. Those days are gone, and they're not coming back. What replaced them is a perfect storm of deindustrialization, failing schools, and crime rates that would make a war zone blush. This is now regularly cited as one of the most dangerous small towns in America. The violent crime rate is more than triple the national average. Let that sink in for a moment. Triple. You've got these beautiful 19th century buildings downtown, gorgeous architecture that speaks to a prosperous past when cotton money and rail commerce made this a regional powerhouse. And right next to them are what locals call the no-go zones, areas where even longtime residents don't venture after dark, places where businesses have barred windows and nobody walks alone. The contrast is jarring. It's like walking through a museum of what used to work in America while the present reality crumbles around you in real time. Here's the thing, when your school system is failing and your streets aren't safe, the people who have options leave, and the people who have options are usually the ones with education, skills, and money. So you end up in this death spiral where the tax base shrinks, services get worse, more people leave, and the cycle continues accelerating downward. The median home price in Pine Bluff is under $70,000. That's not because it's a hidden gem waiting to be discovered. That's because nobody wants to stay. That's because the houses that do sell are often bought by out-of-state investors who rent them out and contribute nothing to the community. Albany, Georgia holds the record. for one of the sharpest downtown collapses in recent American history. Certain census tracts saw a 39.3% population drop over 10 years. To put that in perspective, imagine if 4 out of every 10 houses on your street just emptied out. Furniture left behind, yards overgrown, windows dark. That's what happened here, and it happened block by block until entire neighborhoods looked abandoned. Albany got hit with a 1-2 punch that it couldn't recover from. First came the natural disasters. Catastrophic flooding that destroyed homes, businesses, and infrastructure repeatedly. The kind of flooding where you're not just dealing with water in the basement, you're dealing with houses condemned, businesses bankrupted, entire commercial districts wiped out. Then came the brain drain. The most educated young people, the ones with college degrees and technical skills, looked around at a city that couldn't seem to catch a break and decided to move to Atlanta or Savannah, where opportunity actually existed and floods weren't a regular occurrence. What's left is an aging population trying to maintain a city that was built for far more people. The infrastructure is crumbling because there's no tax base to maintain it. Roads have potholes deep enough to lose a tire. Schools are struggling because the families with means have left and taken their property taxes with them. The median household income is around $36,000, and the poverty rate sits near 30%. When disaster strikes a place that's already economically fragile, recovery isn't just hard. Sometimes it's impossible, and the people who remain aren't staying because Albany is great. They're staying because they don't have the resources to leave, because their family has been there for generations, because moving requires money and energy that poverty has drained from them. That's not community pride, that's economic entrapment dressed up in Southern hospitality. But if you think those sound bad, let me introduce you to Cairo, Illinois, pronounced Cairo by locals who are increasingly rare. This isn't a shrinking town, this is an extinction event in slow motion. The population has plummeted from 15,000 people to under 1,700. Read that again, 15,000 to 1,700. That's a 90% population loss. The city lost its hospital, so medical emergencies now mean a dangerous wait for an ambulance to arrive from another town. It lost its grocery stores, creating a food desert where residents have to drive miles just to buy fresh produce. The housing authority was essentially dissolved by the federal government after years of mismanagement and corruption. This is a town without a pulse, and walking through it feels like walking through a zombie movie set that someone forgot to strike. And yes, that sounds dramatic. It's also accurate. Entire blocks are abandoned, windows smashed, doors hanging open. Buildings that once housed thriving businesses now have trees growing through their roofs and vines crawling up their walls. The few people who remain are living in what amounts to American ruins, islands of habitation in a sea of decay. Here's the kicker. This didn't happen because of a natural disaster or a single economic shock like a factory closing. This was total systemic failure, a dark mix of racial tension, political corruption, and government neglect that created a feedback loop of decline that became unstoppable. The median household income for those still hanging on is barely above $22,000. There's no grocery store, so residents have to drive to the next town for food, burning gas money they can barely afford. There's no hospital, so a medical emergency means a long ambulance ride and hoping you don't die on the way. Cairo isn't a cautionary tale, it's a horror story, and it's happening in America right now. Gary, Indiana continues its slow motion collapse, losing roughly 1 to 2% of its population every single year like clockwork. It's now sitting at less than 40% of its peak population. Gary was built for 200,000 people during the glory days of American steel. It now houses fewer than 70,000. Let me paint you a picture of what that looks like on the ground. Entire neighborhoods are dark at night, not because people are sleeping, dark because there's nobody living there anymore. The city literally cannot afford to keep the lights on in most areas, so streetlights don't work and roads don't get repaired. You drive through and see house after house boarded up, block after block, looking like something out of a disaster movie. The steel industry that built this city collapsed decades ago, and when it went down, it took Gary with it. The median home price is under $50,000, and even at that bargain basement price, houses sit on the market for months or years because nobody wants to move to Gary. The violent crime rate is more than quadruple the national average. Schools are underfunded and understaffed. understaffed, graduating students who are woefully unprepared for a modern economy. The unemployment rate hovers well above the national average. This is what happens when an entire city's economy is built on a single industry and that industry dies. Gary didn't diversify when it had the chance. It couldn't adapt when the warning signs appeared, and now it's a monument to the American Rust Belt's failure to evolve beyond manufacturing. The people who remain aren't there because Gary offers them something. They're there because leaving requires money they don't have, because their families have been there for 3 generations, because the house they own is worth so little they can't afford to sell it and start over somewhere else. When the American dream dies, it doesn't disappear quietly into the night. It leaves places like Gary behind as evidence. And finally, we have Paradise, Nevada, which sounds like it should be on a completely different list. This is technically the home of the Las Vegas Strip, the epicenter of American excess and entertainment. Glitz, glamour, endless opportunity, right? Wrong. The residential population dropped by nearly 27% over 5 years. Here's what nobody tells you about Paradise. While tourists are dropping thousands of dollars on blackjack and bottle service just blocks away, the people who actually live there are getting priced out of their own backyards. Corporate investors bought up residential blocks and converted them to short-term rentals for tourists who want to stay off the strip. Housing prices and rents skyrocketed as tourism fluctuated wildly, creating what locals call extreme housing volatility. One year the market is hot and landlords are raising rent by 30%. The next year tourism tanks, jobs disappear, but the rent doesn't go back down. But here's the twist: the rent never goes back down. The median rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is well over $1,000, and with the median household income around $48,000, that math doesn't work for a lot of families, especially the service workers who keep the casinos running. So they leave. They move to Henderson or North Las Vegas or out of Nevada entirely, searching for somewhere they can actually afford to build a life. Paradise is the perfect example of how American tourism and corporate real estate can devour the communities they're supposedly built on. The irony is thick enough to choke on. You're living in paradise, surrounded by billion-dollar casinos and tourists spending more on dinner than you make in a week, watching visitors live out fantasies you can't afford in your own hometown. And then one day you realize you can't afford to stay anymore. Your landlord wants another rent increase. Your job at the casino pays the same as it did 5 years ago. Your kid's school is overcrowded and underfunded, so you pack up and leave Paradise for somewhere you can actually survive, somewhere the American dream hasn't been completely monetized and sold to the highest bidder. The population that remains is increasingly transient, increasingly disconnected, increasingly just passing through a place that has no interest in being anyone's home. That's not a city, that's a backdrop with a residential problem, a stage set that forgot it was supposed to house the people who keep the show running.